roll camera, sound ready? 3, 2, 1, action. Just tell me one moment of being out here in the dunes, the solitude in summertime.
Oh, that was, I mean, this was the place for kids. They could go out on the dunes, way a quarter of a half mile away, and we could see them, and they could have their freedom. They were free-range kids. It was a free-range childhood, where they could go out and explore and find the little snakes, and they could go follow the streams and build little dams for them to know not to go through, and they had their huge learning experiences. They had, I think, the perfect childhood. I call it the golden childhood.
If you want to try something out, this is the place to do it. If you want to do something you've never done before, this is the place to do it. Whether it's the wave of artists who came here at the beginning of the 20th century who were looking at the light and saying, I can do stuff with this, or the writers who were deciding, we can't go to Europe this year because of World War I. I'm going to come and write about this incredible place, where you've got all sorts of musicians and creative people, and then just people who wanted to learn about that or wanted to be in the presence of that. So you've got this group of people at many different times who have chosen to be here either because it gives them more freedom, or it gives them solace, or it gives them escape. It gives them something that they don't have in their lives. And that was really evident to me when I first was coming here.
Now, Provincetown used to be a lot larger than it is today. There were over 4,000 people here in the 19th century. Now comes the 1960s. First of all, you had this post-World War II generation of young people. You call them what you want.
Hippies, Hells Angels, Hare Krishnas, local fishermen. That was fishing fleet was big. That's what supported the community. Fishing fleet, artists, real tight-knit community. And I do remember the hippies in particular. And you're a kid, you look at these people bathing in the local bird bath down in the center of town, or a water bubbler. They're washing their hair, and they just lived on the streets, and it's just what was done back then, I guess.
I can remember playing baseball and looking over behind the outfield fence and seeing tents and climbing the fence and needles and drug paraphernalia. And I was my own detective, and I ran to the phone booth and called Dad and said, Dad, there's people living in the woods and there's needles, and he goes, get the hell out of here.
You've got this sense of continuity of creative and possibly a little strange people. And that really continued through the 60s and 70s.
All these new players, new phenomena, drugs, and murders, and I think people were really flipped out.
It must have been the most traumatic experience of her life. Can you imagine for a child to do that? I'm glad it wasn't my kids. They could have been wandering looking for blueberries and found that. So I really feel sorry that a child had to do that, but I'm glad that somebody did, because this woman would have just disappeared, and that would be tragic.
Go through details of the photos.
Sure. Well, they're black and white, and if I remember, that the forensics at the time had estimated she had been dead from maybe 10 weeks to 3 weeks. I think the forensics was less specific back then. So this being July, she had been in the sun for quite some time, so her skin was black as like a rotten banana peel. Remember, that's the phrase I thought when I saw the photograph. Her hands had been removed. She had been nearly decapitated, her teeth destroyed, and at different wounds of her hands and different parts of her body, there were maggots. She had been outside for quite some time in the elements, and I don't think many people, I don't think you ever see something like that often. And so I think that's what I remember those photographs. I remember there being the bush, the towel, the scrub. It's very familiar, the terrain around her. I can't necessarily say I could bring you to it, but having lived out here for this long, it's Cape Cod, and just sort of, I think that too sort of struck me to see just the disregard for someone's life in a place that is so beautiful.
We couldn't give her a name, and in our culture, names are so important. It's so important to feel like you've made a difference in the world, and usually we do that by naming ourselves or giving ourselves titles. We couldn't do that for her, but we did the next best thing. We buried her, and it just reminds me of the decades when before the Cape Cod Canal was dug, when this area was known as the graveyard of the Atlantic because of all the shipwrecks and all the bodies that came ashore with no name, with no knowledge, and we buried them too. They're in our cemetery. So we've got this tradition, I think, of, there's just so far we could go to help her in terms of restoring an identity and possibly helping someone out there who still might not have closure. But we respected her. We gave her that dignity, and that to me, despite all the changes and all the levels and things that have been going on in Provincetown, that's the core of our community. Those are the people we are, and I'm very, very proud to be part of that.
It's some time ago now, but I remember I'm a young reporter. I was 2 years out of journalism school, and I think, I remember I had a professor that told me to be careful of Woodward and Bernstein syndrome. You're not always on the cusp of uncovering something big. Don't make it bigger than it is. But I couldn't help but, as I was going there, because it was the 30th anniversary of her murder, that thinking, like, maybe I'd be the one that I would find one thing that somebody hadn't seen after all these years. And of course, it's a bit foolish to think that, but nevertheless, I want to be part of the reporting of the story for the anniversary, bring more attention to it so that maybe something would come out of it. But that's the day I met Officer Warren Tobias. And I had been aware of him before, over the previous 2 years. I like him very much. I think he's a good guy. He's a bit gruff. And so I went in there, sort of with the young reporter's chip on my shoulder, to his gruffness. And when he handed me the box, he said, I want to warn you, this is pretty graphic. So I tried to respond with a bravado. I'm like, please, I've seen some things in my life, I'll be fine. But then when I started going through it, I sat down very quickly because I thought I was going to faint. Because the photographs of when they had found her are really grisly. And it brings very quickly to mind just the viciousness of what must have happened to her.
I've already answered the next question, but how did it affect you as a journalist?
I think it's always a reminder that you're going into something with sort of being introduced to the myth before the facts. And when I first looked at the boxes of evidence at the Provincetown Police Station, and you go through it, and you realize the viciousness of the crime, and that because her identity is unknown, you don't really have anything to attach the story to. You don't have the full humanity. But when you look at the photos, I don't see how you can't be moved by it, moved being upset by it, you know, just the horror of it. And that this is a town that, I mean, I live here, so it's where my life is, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly of life. But this is a place that so many people come to have fun, to find themselves, to create, to explore their imaginations, and then to have something so awful happen right in the midst of that. It kind of jars you into remembering this isn't a Disneyland, this is real world, and these kind of things can happen. And then the added tragedy of just not being able to have any sense of justice or, again, to give a full humanity to whomever she was. You just don't know.